here who is here in person and also those who are online. I also want to thank the committee, Inya and Neva, and the Era Committee for letting me be here. I'm a bit of an oddball because most of my research interest is into sound, is primarily through the medium of the instrument. So my PhD thesis, which I completed in 2021, was about pianos of the late 19th century. And I remember when Inya first set up the website and she was like, I'm gathering a depository of who is doing research on historical recordings. And I said, well, I don't do historical recordings, I record historical pianos. And she was like, oh. So I finally made it onto the program after all these years, which is great. So after my PhD, I continued this pursuit into the medium of pianos into the early 20th century, and that was what led my curiosity into the Musical Museum in Brantford, a museum which showcases the history of reproduction of sound, mainly through mechanical instruments. And I help out at the Royal Library in the Musical Museum, but I also help out with the instruments that are on display. And so part of being there meant that I can access this wealth of information and explore whatever potentials there are. So I'm really grateful for the museum for letting me be there. And one of the talks that stem out of one of the curiosity at the museum is on this roll here. And I've actually brought it with me, but I'm not going to pass it around because I'm just gonna, if you want to see it, come to me. For reasons, because it doesn't belong to me, it belongs to the museum. And the reason why I was quite curious about this role is because over these 2 years, I've been exploring the idea of agency, of what it means to not just listen to rolls, but play with piano rolls. And so I established a concert series in the museum called Hybrid Day, where I invited live musicians to play with what we have accompaniment rolls. So that's rolls that have the accompaniment part on it, and then they play almost like a music -1, and we curate a program for that so that it's playing alongside the piano. And this question, these are the questions that I keep asking me whilst I'm looking at this phenomenon, is what is a performer and where is the authorship? And how do technological media and instruments mediate and transform musical experiences? And I am very much inspired by what Pickett and Staniet said about this idea of intermundane, is where there's an interaction between live musicians and the dead in the recorded performance. And so we're going to explore all of this through this mystery box. We're going to play like a game of musical Cluedo. So we're going to look at who is the person, what's the weapon, which is the format arrangement, and where, location, context of use. So as a teaser, I'm going to play you a bit of it. I want you to excuse the recording because it's an emulation kindly provided by Koos van Koestrom, who's from Jutra Rolls in Netherlands. He comes over to scan some of our rolls. He's more of an expert on scanning Hupfeld and Voltaire rolls, but I said, can you scan this one? And can you let me hear how it sounds like? Because before this, I've heard it once when I was checking the roll throughout Ampico reproducing piano, and because I was checking for any tones in the paper, I didn't record it. So while I was listening to it, I was just making sure it's still in a good condition. So and I wouldn't dare to play it again because this could be the only copy. I don't know. So here is a snapshot of a little bit of how it sounds. So hold your thoughts, because I know there's already a lot of questions in your mind into what you're hearing. So let's start with the person, actant. So who is the pianist? I spent a considerable time on this question. You could just look at, by the way, you could just look into the Ampico catalog, but I deliberately didn't do that right at the start because that will just spoil all the fun, wouldn't it? It could be Rachmaninoff because Rachmaninoff made a arrangement of Troika, which he also published through Ampico, and we also tested the Rachmaninoff Troika on the same piano that we tested on this roll. So there are some resemblances in some of the kind of tempo and fluctuations that in some passages to make that inference. But I'm not going to delve into too much analysis because you'll see why I don't delve into it soon. So it could be Rachmaninoff, could be Godowsky because he was really a representative of Ampico right from the start. And he featured a lot on the Ampico demonstration concerts. So these companies, piano roll companies, had demonstration concerts where they invited pianists to play to showcase that there was a reproduction of what they played through the mechanical instrument. So Godowsky was a very prominent figure in the Ampico world, and he himself also made a lot of arrangements, complicated arrangements, as you heard in teaser. It's not what you can do under 10 fingers. So it could be Godowsky, but Godowsky didn't make much Tchaikovsky arrangements, and he definitely didn't do any Tchaikovsky recordings for the Ampico. And then it could be Margaret Volavi, because she recorded 2 concertos with Ampico. One is the Greek piano concerto, and on the Piano Institute, according to Rex Lawson, this could be the room which she recorded the concerto in, and she also recorded the Liszt concerto as well, so not ruling that out. I spent a long time on Percy Grainger because, partly because Percy Grainger made also an arrangement of the piano concerto, Tchaikovsky's piano concerto, which he released in 1943. So I did a lot of kind of comparison between what he did on the score of that and what I heard on this roll. But I shouldn't really have been convinced that it was Grainger because Grainger only recorded for Deal Art, another piano roll company. So it was I was really trying to convince myself it was Grainger, but it wasn't. So I was running down all these rabbit holes, and then at one point I was like thinking, actually, this is not a great idea because I got so fixated that it had to be of that question, who is the pianist, that I was starting to lose the bigger picture of why did these roles exist in the first place. So instead of asking the question, who is the pianist, I asked, why is this role anonymous? And that took me down a slightly different route, because with all the other Hybrid Day series, we usually do a recording and then we would play with the role. A lot of the musicians that had come to the Hybrid Day concerts, they didn't really, in a way, care who the pianist was on the record. They were just hearing the interpretation, and they were trying to weave around creativity in how do you collaborate with a fixed interpretation. So this leads us into the second act of our mystery solving, which is looking at the weapon. So arrangement roles of piano concertos exist in primarily 2 formats. There is the piano and orchestra part, where you have both parts on the roll, and that is usually commercially circulated. Why? Because piano rolls was about what people heard at the time at the concerts, and that included genres beyond the pianos themselves, symphony reductions, popular genres such as the ragtime. And so what was popular was actually all these arrangements of symphonies and concerto roles. And so there was a bit of parallels between that. And the way that people would do it for these piano rolls is, on the rolls themselves, it was, say, recorded by, for example, Percy Grainger. But some pianists would record the orchestral part on top of the piano part. So they will have the original, and then they will record it. And then, or it could be punched in. So the editors punched in the orchestral part. We don't know much information into that because on the roll themselves, they only say played by the pianist. So there are some examples where this is the case, and you can see that sometimes it's just by one pianist, sometimes if it's an arrangement of a symphony, it's two pianists. But this is not really the genre. Again, we're trying to ask what is the purpose. This is not the format of this particular roll, so we are going on to looking at the second format. And also to say that I regard this as a complete performance. So when this recording itself is a completed, I should have said, it should have been completed performance. It's a performance which you can't add on to it. Whereas the second genre that we look at is what I call an to be completed performance, because this is where only the solo part is recorded. And I've been spending a lot of time last year writing an article about Mara Hayes's piano concerto, Greek piano concerto roll, where only the piano solo part is recorded. And so, and this is a really interesting debate in terms of how then do you play with something that is solo part recorded, and where do they function? Because if you look into the catalog, commercially circulated catalog of piano rolls, they are not in there because it's a property of the roll company. It's only used by roll companies as part of a commission, as part of a propaganda, advertisement propaganda. And this idea of playing alongside of your reproduction is not particularly new, because Edison Tone also had something called tone tests, where they invited musicians to showcase this authenticity, as you like, of this reproduction. But in piano rolls, in concerto piano rolls, it was something that took off very much in the 1920s, and that stopped around 1928. And this is just really two extreme comparisons. So you see that initially the debate was on the invisible pianists, the pianists that are absent. And eventually, towards the end of 1920s, towards 1928, you see more of the piano replacing the soloist. And I take this as an example to show you these two extreme debates, and this shift of how the piano becomes the soloist. By here, you can see that they mentioned that the Saint-Saëns concerto is being has been recorded by the Aeolian Company, but who is the pianist is not mentioned in the press, and that's not unusual in the press of those times, where they omit the pianist that recorded it. You have the conductor, you have the orchestra who's conducting it, but it doesn't mention who is playing the piano part. I did get the 5-minute warning, so I wanted to quickly show you that. So this roll neither conforms to format 1 or format 2. It's actually a mix of both, and I did a little bit of an analysis of what's happening. So basically, there are parts where only the piano plays, and then you're expected to play a bit of piano concerto accompaniment to it. And there are parts where it plays both the orchestra and the accompaniment. So that leaves me thinking, what do I do then? Where does my creativity come in to interact with the piano roll? And I'm going to break the surprise, and show you that, review to you that in the catalog there is a commercially released roll of this, and this is by Henry Sylvain, and this particular roll here. That was in my preliminary list of could be, but I kind of ruled this out quite quickly because on the piano roll themselves, so the punch holes represent the musical notes. You can see that it actually takes the orchestral introduction where it goes bum 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 bum, and you have that in the commercially released recording. So, for the sake of time, there is a link to hear this whole recording online, but I won't dwell too much on that. But this is a comparison that I made of what is in the commercially released version that we have, that's available to public, and this recording was emulated by someone in the States who had a roll of this, and what this roll is, and you can see in the yellow selection, it's what's the difference between the two. There are some decisions which meant there are some answers which are filled in terms of what do I play if I'm going to perform with this roll, and especially in accordance with the orchestral parts that I could play, and also in terms of in big sections where he's cut. So for example, 102 to 453, so that basically is a cut from the second motif back to the recapitulation of the second motif instead of taking the second motif from the exposition. So what do I do in that transition if I was playing with that roll? So it did answer some questions, but there were also questions especially in terms of the cadenza. Why did he eventually truncate out a whole huge section of the cadenza? But it was also very surprising in the first roll, because if you make an arrangement or a reduction of a piano concerto, you probably would unlikely include the whole cadenza in. It's not something that is usual in a lot of piano concerto arrangement reductions. And so that still leaves us the question of, what is this? Is this an arrangement of, is this a pre-edition of what this commercially released version is? Or is this actually what was used in the showroom by Henry Sylvain? So I'll make my conclusion now, very quickly. But there are some evidences of Sylvain playing for the Ampico in 1920 and 1921, saying that he's played something, but again, he doesn't mention what he played. And it did mention that he played with rolls. He also played arrangements of Percy Granger's Shepherd's Hay. So was it those ones that he played, or was it this one? There's still a lot of unanswered questions to that. So although we have solved the mystery of who it is and who it might be, we kind of ended up with lots more mysteries about why this role exists. Like, what does the absence of a name mean? As a curator, you wouldn't leave a role lying around in the company unnamed, but just saying it's special, unless you know what it is. And so that absence is it intentional? Is it because it's an assumption that everyone mean? Or is it because the priorities is not on the pianists themselves, but the priority is on this new pianism that people were trying to create in pianos. And that is where my second question is, where it's like, is it a musical experiment or is it a finished arrangement? Because a lot of composers at that time who were using piano rolls as a compositional tool to expand the meaning of what pianistic and pianism and playing the piano meant. Three very different genres, as you like. And so it's all about kind of thinking about, if you don't have, I end with this thought, is if you take the pianist out of the piano, what do you get? You don't quite get an AI situation, I don't think. It's not like today where we're completely replacing the human with a machine. It's somewhere in between. And so I thank you all for listening and look forward to your questions. And thanks to the museum again. And yeah.